And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another installment of my DC Rebirth reading guide series. Today's video 3.1, in which we're going to start discussing the Justice League and Suicide Squad. There are going to be 9 videos in this section, section 3, and this is 3.1, the very first video. And hopefully this video is going to start satisfying those of you who really wanted to see a map and some infographics and some kind of schematic relational information from one series to the other or one issue to the other. This is where we dive into it. The last few sections have just been introductions, but now we're going to get into it. As a very quick intro for today, just to remind you that I have read the entirety of DC Rebirth. That's over 3,370 issues, give or take, and I've been releasing a guide for this entire era. I have tackled it in different sections, so I've been slicing off things that are out of continuity or Black Label and things like that. And now in this core universe series, we're looking at the remaining 2,724 single issues that make up the core continuity. On my YouTube channel, there are 4 playlists. There's the DC Rebirth playlist for everything, which is just a huge holding area for every single DC Rebirth related video that I have. This video will be in that. Every DC Rebirth video is going to be on that playlist, but there's a more curated playlist, which is just the core continuity for those of you that are just interested in the absolute essential, streamlined, mainline DC universe for the Rebirth era. As well as that, there's another sort of refined playlist of just the custom DC Rebirth comics that I've done, and also one of just all the kind of spillovers, like I say, Black Label, DC's, things like that. So of those 4 playlists, you'll hopefully be able to find the one that suits you and dive into it. But today we are looking at the core universe. Finally, I would remind you that before you watch this video, you should really go back and watch the introduction video for the series, which is video 0.0 on this playlist for the core universe, because that video sets the scene for this whole era of comics, as well as explaining how this reading guide follows directly on from my New 52 reading guide, as well as covering some very key concepts that I'm going to be referring to regularly throughout my content. Those are ideas such as volumes with a big V and volumes with a small v, and also type P and J readers, which I'm not going to have time to explain every single time I do a video. They're going to be pretty fundamental to understand the videos that I do, but with no further ado, let's dive into it. Let's start video 3.1, Justice League and Suicide Squad. Okay people, this is it. This is the guide, DC Universe Rebirth. This probably isn't what you were initially expecting, because it's not breaking stuff down trade paperback by trade paperback, but we will get to that in just a second. What this is specifically the map for Justice League and Suicide Squad. I'm going to talk you through it just in terms of the events, and then we're going to dive into the detail. So to start off with, what you can see here, this is the DC Universe Rebirth banner with the blue top, and if we dive into it, what we will see is here we've got all the various series on the left, and we've got various lines collecting them. Now it's really simple. If something is in a solid color, then that's to do with Justice League or Suicide Squad, and all these large black boxes are major events and crossovers and tie-ins. That's why I'm doing it this way, because it is so confusing. The ones that don't have solid colors, so the ones that are white boxes, are not series that you need to read. These are just series that at some point or another intersect with Justice League and Suicide Squad. Annoyingly for this map, there's quite a lot that intersect in this non-essential way. You can see here there are these yellow lines that are dotted lines. And what these lines indicate, for example, in the case of, say, Batgirl, is that with Batgirl, it's a series that's non-essential reading, and then it intersects with Year of the Villain up here, but in a non-essential way. So in case you're just wondering, you're trying to be a completionist, that's where all these yellow things fit in. In fact, as you can see here, there's even some red ones. So Batman and Batman and the Outsiders touch Year of the Villain, but only in a very vague way. We're going to be discussing Year of the Villain in a huge amount of detail in 4 or 5 videos time. And that's literally going to be an hour-long video on Year of the Villain. And at that point, I'll be talking about all the things that are non-essential tie-ins, and then optional tie-ins here with the yellow ones, and then we'll talk about the ones that are fundamental, the green tie-ins. But that's what all these boxes are for. If it's a hollow or a white box, you do not have to read that series. You just need to be aware that at some point is going to touch the event that it touches. And if it's a solid box here, it's going to be something we're going to be talking through during this section, which is section 3 of the guide. The one thing I would just point out is that there's a few here like Titans, Green Arrow, Aquaman and Wonder Woman, where whilst you don't have to read the series, at some point in the life of that series, they will intersect with an event, like for example here in the Witching Hour, in a way that is very key for you to understand. But we'll talk about that one at a time as we get to it when those intersections happen. But you do not have to read these hollow boxes. You do not have to read those series. You only have to read the ones that are in the solid kind of goldy yellow colour. In case you're wondering why I've done the map like this, looking at the analytics of my New 52 reading guide, people actually tended to read the New 52 in section. I mean, to be honest, from what I could tell, most people didn't read all of the New 52. People watched the introduction video, then they looked at Batman, then they looked at Justice League, and then that was pretty much it. A few people cared about Lanterns and Superman and that sort of thing, but people tend to view and read comics by family. And so as a result, also because of the overwhelming event-led dominance of DC Rebirth, it made much more sense to do this by family. So if you are a DC Rebirth fan and you're interested in reading the Justice League section, if nothing else, this is how you would read it. I'm going to give you a really quick overview event by event. So today we're going to be talking about Justice League. We're going to start off with Justice League. We're going to talk about then Suicide Squad versus Justice League. We're then going to move back onto Justice League, and it's eventually going to hit Dark Knight's Metal. That's literally all we're going to cover today. But whilst doing that, we are also going to cover that event there, Suicide Squad versus Justice League, as well as Justice League of America. We're going to cover all that today, and then a little bit about the way it's collected in trades and in oversized hardcover. After that, later on in this series, we will be covering the Dark Knight's Metal series and No Justice. We'll then be covering Sink Atlantis and Drowned Earth, and then eventually over to Year of the Villain, Dark Knight's Death Metal, and Endless Winter. You'll see here right at the end what we have is Future State, which is going to be viewed as the final line that kind of demarcates and ends the DC Rebirth era. So that's why these events are all really important to look at. I know they look a bit monolithic and a bit black. That's by design. That's intended to be that way. But like I say, that's kind of where we are. And in terms of today, just keep in mind, we're just going to be focusing on this bit. Justice League, Suicide Squad, Justice League, JLA, all the way up till Dark Knight's Metal. Right, that's the overview. That's the context. That's just understanding what we're zooming in on today. So let's zoom in. This is the DC Universe Rebirth, Justice League and Suicide Squad map. Trade by trade. Again, as you can see, is built on the exact same principle as the overarching thematic map we saw. So again, you can ignore the boxes that are white, the yellow lines are optional, so on and so forth. But now we're going to dive into it trade by trade, and there's going to be some interesting quirks here that are worth keeping in mind. Obviously, as you can see, I have the whole map here. It includes stuff like Sink Atlantis, Drowned Earth, Year of the Villain, Dark Knight's Death Metal, all the way over to Endless Winter, and then a little sneaky little teaser there after Endless Winter before we get to Future State. You'll also note, as I hover over this, that every single picture has the name of the trade paperback as a floating tooltip. That's a new little thing that I learned how to do. I thought it was quite cool, and again, this is the benefit of the software that I'm paying for to do this. Expensive and annoying, especially given this channel doesn't really monetize anything, but at the same time, it's kind of worth it. So with no further ado, staying focused on what we were talking about literally a few moments ago, this is the era that we are going to be looking at, this area of this era. So again, flipping back, that's this bit, but now let's dive into some detail, and this is what we're looking at. So we're going to start here with Justice League Volume 1, The Extinction Machines. Before we dive into it, actually, the reason we're going to start with Justice League is the same reason we started with it in the New 52 guide. The Justice League is often the central linchpin for all the major series and especially events in the DC universe in any given era, and this was definitely the case during the New 52, and is even more the case now during DC Rebirth. So this series we're looking at here is Justice League 2016 to 2018. It's its own volume with a big V. It has its own issue 1, so on and so forth. It was written by Brian Hitch, who was now transitioning from being kind of a superstar artist. He was like most famous for drawing stuff like the Ultimate Comics over in Marvel, and then the relatively standalone JLA maxi series at the end of the New 52. He's transitioning from being that artist to being a writer. This is not his first writing credit. I think his first writing credit was actually the original series Real Heroes over in Image Comics. And Hitch writes this Justice League series up to issue 31, where he leaves just before Dark Knight's Metal happens. Christopher Priest takes over at that point, but we'll talk about that when that gets to that issue. So this is written by Brian Hitch, and the art is actually by Tony S. Daniel. So to start off with, we're going to look at the very, very, very first issue, which I can see here I actually have in the wrong order. So right, it's going to be handy to tidy these things up as I go along. Here we are. We have Volume 1, The Extinction Machines, there. I will fix the tooltip now. Right, I've repaired it. God bless the software. So, Volume 1 is The Extinction Machines, there. Now, this contains the Justice League Rebirth one-shot, and then issues 1 to 5. And then the next trade paperback, really straightforwardly, just contains issues 6 to 11. Great. The next thing you then need to read is down here, which is this event, Justice League Suicide Squad, as a crossover event. It's a crossover, and also it's actually its own mini-series. So it actually has a 6-issue series, which we'll talk about now. And so here we have it, diving into a fair bit more detail. These are the actual contents of that trade collection, that crossover event, Justice League versus Suicide Squad. Like I say, this entire event happened in 2017, so early on in the DC Rebirth cycle. And the contents are as you can see here. Now, where it says Suicide Squad 8 partial, that's because Suicide Squad issue 8 has like a B-side story, like a small vignette at the end starring Killer Frost, and that bit alone is included here in this trade paperback collection. Then you have the 6-issue series and a couple of Justice League and Suicide Squad tie-ins. The sequencing here is the way you can see it in the terms of this is exactly how it is set up in the trade collection, and this is very, very enjoyable, very, very readable. Some online sources do tweak them a little bit, like for example it might have Suicide Squad 9 after Justice League versus Suicide Squad 4 instead of before, but the trade collection has it in this sequence, and this is fine. This is great. This is totally readable. So this is how I would read it if I was in singles. If you're reading it in trades, this is what you're going to be looking at. One thing that is possibly worth noting is that issue 2, so Justice League versus Suicide Squad 2, does contain a few veiled references to time being missing and the universe being manipulated, both of which are veiled references to Dr. Manhattan and the original planned creative direction of the Rebirth universe. In terms of Suicide Squad, this is all I'm going to touch on it in this particular video. We're actually going to cover the entirety of the Suicide Squad series in video 3.8. So right now, let's just bounce straight back to the main map. Right, so we're back to the map. So these are the trade paperbacks. As we've just discussed, we've got Volume 1, Volume 2, and then we have the specific Justice League versus Suicide Squad. The next bit is already going to be a little bit of a plot twist. What I would recommend you do next is actually now read the entirety of this series, the Justice League of America series. I know a lot of guides would not recommend this. I personally would. Now, Justice League of America is a series from 2017 to 2018. It launches out of the events of Justice League versus Suicide Squad, and the premise of the series is that Batman forms and then leads a second Justice League team with members that he personally handpicks. These members are, in no particular order, the Atom, Batman himself, Black Canary, Frost, Lobo, the Ray, and Vixen. So this series is written by Steve Orlando and actually launches with 4 separate Rebirth issue 1s, each of which focus on one of the 4 lesser known characters that he's chosen. I'll list those in a second, but just to know they all came out in March 2017, and then there was the kind of the inaugural Rebirth issue, like Justice League of America, the Rebirth one-shot, that came out the month after, in April. Those 5 issues are the main reason that DC then released an expanded version of his DC Rebirth Omnibus later on in 2017, which is what I covered back in video 2.1 of this series. So this now explains why they did that. So let's look into the actual trades. The first trade I'd recommend you read after Suicide Squad versus Justice League. Sorry, no, Justice League versus Suicide Squad. is this one, which is just called Road to Rebirth. If you're going to call it anything or number it, I would call it volume with a big V 0. This contains, in order, the Atom one-shot, the Vixen one-shot, the Ray one-shot, the Killer Frost one-shot, and then the Justice League of America one-shot. After you read that, the next one to read is this one, which is volume 1, The Extremists. Now this contains, again, the Rebirth one-shot, and what that means is that if you own both of these trades, you are going to have that issue twice, at the end of this one, and then at the beginning of this one. Anyway, also in The Extremists, you then have issues 1 to 6. It's worth noting that because we're going to talk about the collections in the oversized hardcover towards the end of the video, and it's worth noting that the numbering here is, as I say, the Rebirth one-shot and then 1 to 6. Moving on, we then have volume 2 of Justice League of America, which is called Curse of the King Butcher. That contains issues 7 to 11 only. We then have volume 3, which is called Panic in the Microverse, and that contains issues 12 to 17. Issue 17 actually shows a little bit of the, I don't really want to give spoilers, but of the kind of the main super godlike antagonist that has been teased at the beginning of DC Rebirth. He's hinted at here in issue 17. So again, this is part of Jeff Johns' overarching Doomsday Clock vision. Then we have volume 4, which is just called Surgical Strike, and that has got, in order, Justice League of America Annual 1, followed by issues 18 to 21. And then right at the end, we have volume 5, Deadly Fable, containing issues 22 to 29, and that is the end of Justice League of America in the DC Rebirth era. Something to keep in mind, and I completely understand why some people might view it this way, is that this series actually continued being published throughout, and in fact slightly after Dark Knight's Metal. And to be honest, I'm not going to blame anyone if they said to you, oh, actually this final volume here, volume 5, volume with a small v, Deadly Fable, actually came out after Death Metal. It did, Dark Knight's Metal. I mean, it did, which is true. But the thing is, the entirety of the JLA series, all 6 of these trade paperbacks, have no bearing whatsoever with Dark Knight Metal. So even though this event here, which you can see here on the right, even though this happens sort of in the middle of issues sort of 20 to 25, so somewhere kind of between 4 and 5, give or take, I wouldn't recommend reading it that way, because it makes no fucking difference whatsoever. It makes way more sense just to read all of JLA in one go and then leave it there. That is my recommendation. So with that, we've just done Justice League 1, 2, the Suicide Squad crossover with Justice League. Then I recommend reading all of JLA, and then I recommend diving back into Justice League. So here we have trade paperback 3, which is called Timeless. This contains issues 14 to 19. Now, if you're keeping close watch, you will note that what that means is that the 2 Suicide Squad crossover issues are not here. So what that means is that if we look back, the previous one ended here with issue 11. 12 and 13 are collected here, and then 14 onwards is collected here, which is quite nice if you have the trade paperback collections. Continuing on with the trade paperbacks, if we move over to volume 4, that's called Endless, and that contains issues 20 to 25. Now, for the continuity buffs amongst you, if you are reading Superman at the same time, if you're wondering what's going on with Superman in the Justice League at this point, this is set just after the events of Superman Reborn. Now, Superman Reborn is an event outside the Justice League. So in other words, I haven't included it here. It's not on here at all. Superman's not on here. But it's kind of, it does have some impact. And if you're reading Superman, if you're curious about it, that's where you would find that particular impact. As well as that, issue 22, which is included here, is written by Shea Fontana. Takes place after the events of Trinity 11. Issue 23 is written by Tom DeFalco, and issue 24 is written by Dan Abner, and does involve Mira dealing with the disappearance of Aquaman over in his own series, which happens in issue 25 of that series. And then we have volume 5, which is called Legacy. These are the final issues written by Brian Hitch, and this trade paperback collects issues 26 to 31. And that is it. that then takes us into the Dark Knight Metal event, which is quite a complex event with quite a complex way of being mapped and collected, and we'll be talking about in more depth in the next video, video 3.2. But for today, we've covered all these. We've covered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We've covered 12 trade paperbacks. We've covered this section here and how it should be read. Already a little bit unconventional in terms of the sequencing. And keep in mind that's also this section here that we've covered. In the next video, we will be looking at Dark Knight's Metal. But before we do so, I do want to dive back in here and have a bit of a chat with you about the way these are collected in trade paperback collections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut to that and I'm going to talk about the trade paperbacks versus the Rebirth oversize hardcovers. Okay, before we finish up for the day, it'd be remiss of me not to talk about how this is collected in some of those beautiful deluxe oversized hardcovers. As I mentioned in my introduction video, DC Rebirth was one of those eras where everything was collected in quite a uniform way at the beginning, and then it started becoming a little bit of a mess. It's not like the New 52, which was gorgeous, sumptuously consistent publication formats throughout. Rebirth varies a little bit. So the way that we're looking at it is we're looking at everything through trade paperbacks, and then also I will be talking through the DC Rebirth hardcovers, as you can see here in this picture. But I'm not going to dive into any other things like other formats that have come out, like oversized hardcovers or essential formats and things like that, because it just gets a little bit annoying and it's kind of an impossible task to stay up to date with it. So with that in mind, let's go back to the map here. And I want to talk through some of the annoyances that I found here with the way the oversized hardcovers are collected. So if you look at these two trade paperbacks here, the initial Brian Hitch Justice League trade paperbacks, they're collected in a single oversized hardcover that has this cover. This contains the one-shot, Justice League Rebirth one-shot, which was in the Extinction Machines, trade paperback 1, and it also contains issues 1 to 11. In other words, perfect, absolutely great, keep this as it is. Let's go back to the map. So that's that one covered. The next one is Justice League Suicide Squad. Now this is collected in a single trade paperback, and it's also collected in a single hardcover. Great. Unfortunately, that's a standard size hardcover, which means on your shelf it looks weird. It doesn't look right because it's not the right size, and there is no oversized hardcover version available of this, which is annoying and stupid. Looking at Justice League America, that actually does have an oversized hardcover as well, and that first oversized hardcover contains all the Rebirth one-shots for the 4 marginalized characters and the series itself, and then issues 1 to 7. Now the reason that's interesting is if you look at the first 2 trade paperbacks here, the one on the left, Road to Rebirth, contains all the one-shots, and then the second one, which is called The Extremist, contains issues 1 to 6. In other words, the oversized hardcover contains everything in these 2 trade paperbacks in the same sequence, and then issue 7 as well. Now, issue 7 is actually over on the third image you can see here, volume 2, volume with a small v2, but it is collected in the oversized hardcover for some reason. None of the rest of them are collected, unfortunately, in oversized hardcover, which I think is a bit of a misstep. I really enjoyed this series, and I'm probably going to get some customs made to that effect. Going back up to the Justice League, there is a second oversized hardcover, which contains all the issues from volume with a small v3 and volume with a small v4. So that's issues 12 to 25. However, if you're paying attention, you will realize that what that means is this oversized hardcover, which you can see here, as well as containing everything in those 2 volumes, also contain the 2 crossover issues that are from Justice League versus Suicide Squad. So that's issues 12 and 13. They don't make any sense in this oversized hardcover because, well, they just don't make any sense. They're part of another quite complicated nested event. And so this oversized hardcover is stupid and needs to have those 2 issues removed. It is annoying. Finally, there is the third oversized hardcover, which contains issues 26 to 33, which again, if you're paying close attention, you'll realize contains everything from this volume here, volume 5 Legacy, which is issues 26 to 31. But then the oversized hardcover, which you can see here, also contains issues 32 and 33, which aren't written by Brian Hitch and are part of the Dark Knights Metal crossover, which is quite a complex crossover, and those two issues don't make any sense in and of themselves. And again, from my point of view, they should have been removed. They should never have been collected. And that's a bit of annoyance in the oversized hardcover area. After we finish section 3 of this reading guide, I'm actually going to take a little bit of a break for a couple of days before I go into section 4. And in that break, I'm going to be showing you some of the custom edits and removals and additions and redactions and things I've been doing to fix these oversized hardcovers. But yeah. Right, that's the end of today's video. That shows all the, as you can see on the image here, that shows all the trade paperbacks that we talked about. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's useful and interesting. Please let me know in the comments down below what you think about this approach, talking about events on one side and then zooming in and talking about the trade paperbacks. Please let me know if you think that's helpful. Is the context useful? Is there anything I can do to change or make it a little bit clearer for everyone? But yeah. The next video in this is going to be video 3.2, continuing this on and actually diving quite a lot into Dark Knights Metal.
Alright, thanks for watching everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at @IamThomasJudge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.